Hello there. It's a very nice Sunday morning here. I'm just in the park beneath one of the very nice trees that we have here with my dog. And I guess while I'm on the subject, as usual, of unfashionable opinions, I just wanted to mention one sense I have of an enormous division that exists between peoples and how they deal with things, and it's become very, very apparent as one side of that divide has become more and more culturally dominant, contrary to what's often portrayed in the very media that actually transmits it. And that's that there is a very deep division between those who see spirituality as important and who have a spiritual view of life and human nature and soul and things like this, and those who have a basically materialist view of life. And the latter is without doubt of massively dominant in the paradigm that actually dominates so much of our lives in terms of polite society and the media and formation of many things, and in academia as well. It's tremendously dominant, and inevitably it leads to a certain kind of emptiness, I think, and it leads to certain kinds of problems, which then people then turn around and say, oh yeah, but what about this, what about that, look at religion, look at this, look at that. And yet everything that you could say that religion has done wrong, secular systems do just as bad, truthfully. They just do, maybe do it a bit differently. It's the same way that if you try and criticize any of this sort of like of a worldview, and you just get stuff thrown back at you, and then you realize after a while none of this stuff that people are coming up with is actually, none of it fits your experience, none of it fits the reality that you know. There's a tiny bird just there, gone. None of it fits. But you'll notice this in things, and I mean, like an example of that, I mean, to use something which is topical, and I'm not going to go into the whole thing here, but the whole abortion debate, that's become so topical, even outside the United States, because of the influence of social media. We've been dominated at a certain sort of like intellectual level for a long time by an entirely materialist view of things, and basically, everything is very dry, very materialist, and so we get to this whole question of sort of like, like there is only one body involved in an abortion, i.e. that of the woman carrying the fetus. And that is put over again and again and again and again and repeated like a mantra. But there is never any to actually bring in the most fundamental thing, which is the actual personhood of the fetus, and what will give rise eventually to an independent human being ultimately. Dealing with that is considered to be taboo. Oh no, you can't do that. But you see what the despiritualizing of things does, though, because it means that you can't talk about the soul. You can't talk about things like, okay, when does the soul enter into the fetus? When does that become what we know as a human being? You know, you can't even talk about that because it's like, oh, that's superstition. But those are the fundamental questions. Those are fundamental questions. But the actual the actual discussion, if there is a discussion, um, is is quite viciously policed. To be truthful, it really is. There's no way anybody can talk about these things because then it's a question of, well, how dare you? How dare you even have an opinion? Um, but whether you agree with, like abortions or not, or at which stage, or any of this sort of stuff, yeah, and anybody has a right to have an opinion on these things because they are ethical issues, and ethical considerations are things that people should um, engage in to the best of their ability. But if you have an opinion on these things, um, uh, your opinion is meant to only be based on a specific set of materialist parameters, and if you go beyond that, as human beings have for the vast majority of their history, then your opinion and your reasoning and your argument is all considered invalid from the start, and that's how we control in the modern world. That's how we one of the ways that we control human life is through the total invalidation of actually of spirituality. And I'm not suggesting you should be have any particular form of spirituality. Like you should be Christian, or you should be pagan, or you should be this or that. Yeah, but I will say that the spiritual, as something beyond the material, is and always has been a deeply important part of human life and a deeply important part of life. And to pretend otherwise and to have this crowing, arrogant stance that we are now beyond the entirety of human history in our great, supposedly rational superiority is a bizarre hubris. It really is. And it's a hubris which is acted out on people day in, day out. Because contrary to what, the BBC will like to tell you, or these other people, people are not always thinking and feeling the same way, and if they're not, they're some sort of an underclass. Anyway, that's my thoughts for today. Have a good Sunday. Bye. Hello, I just wanted to add a little bit to my video. Now I'm home and everything. And to make a few things, to clarify a few things. My concern is the way that we seem to invalidate entire dimensions of life because they don't fit with certain sorts of materialist ideology, which have become very influential in various ways. Influential out of proportion to their actual presence in terms of the people who actively hold those views in many ways. And that's what concerns me. And the invalidation of spirituality, unless you make it an almost entirely secular affair, that's something which certainly concerns me. I think spirituality is very, very important. Yeah. And again, I'm not interested in the whole thing about, oh, the terrible things that religion have done. Yeah, sure, we know that. Yeah, it's part of human society. It's part of, all human societies do rubbish things, and religions have been part of that. You don't get away from that by simply getting rid of the religion or getting rid of the things that religion refers to. You know, you only have to look at the sort of like the 20th century to see examples of entirely atheistic regimes which have behaved with dreadful atrocity. So no, just forget that. Um, Also, in terms of the abortion debate, my point as well is not people should think this or should think that, but that they all have a right to actually engage in ethical consideration around things, and sometimes spiritual issues which go beyond materialist considerations, are perfectly valid parts of people's ethical consideration. And to imagine that they're not is dumb, frankly, and it shows no sense of history and no sense of any of the history of moral philosophy either, really. So that's another thing. Um, and like I always said with abortion, I don't consider it to be my job to tell people what to do with their bodies or who they can kill. Basically, that's the job for the law. I'm not a lawmaker. I'm not a politician. I don't want to be. However, in terms of ethics, ethical considerations, questions are not there simply to be suppressed, especially simply because somebody is passionate and angry and decides that you don't have a right to an opinion, you know? So that's another thing. I think it's a great shame that these sorts of issues are surrounded with coercive hysteria, which is what happens. And it is, it's just coercive hysteria. And I have to say again, the left is the absolute worst for pushing this, aside maybe from actual religious fundamentalists. But the left is basically another form of fundamentalism as far as I can see. And the way that the left behaves is, I think, pretty dreadful, by and large. And what I find particularly dreadful is the way that it mimics intelligence and it mimics reason. Yeah? And it quite obviously thinks that it is the only possible reasonable position for us, people like us. Yeah, it's junk. Absolute junk. So, um, that's another thing. Don't know if there's anything else to add to it, really. Um, yeah, that's my sort of like my qualifying piece at the end of it. Uh, I think spirituality is very important. I think spiritual dimension to life is extremely important, um, and I think it's something which gets excised because it's very convenient for a certain kind of modern social control to remove these things. It leaves people with only politics as their religion, essentially, and only politics as their ethical basis, most essentially. That's the most disastrous thing you can think of, truthfully. Um, it leaves people weak. It leaves people dependent. It leaves people manipulable. It leaves people fearful. And I think this is one of the reasons why spirituality is invalidated in the modern world. It's to make people more malleable, to make people more manipulable. I think that's very true, actually. You will always find again and again populations that have suffered oppression and live under oppressive conditions and have a lot to get through and a lot to struggle for. These people in general depend upon their religions and they draw strength from their religions. That is not some coincidence. Yeah, religions, spirituality gives people strength and it strengthens their individuality as well. So, um, I just wanted to make all those points basically, and that's it for my video. Thank you.